Okay. Hello and welcome to Tell Us Your Effing Story, a podcast by franchisors for franchisors where we go behind the scenes with some of the most interesting characters in the Australian franchise industry. I'm your host, Bruce McFarlane, my co-host, John Sully. Today with Richard Thame, the chairman of the FCA. So we're going to get behind
the big dog.
The big dog, yes. John?
Righto. Tell us your fucking story.
Okay. So it's franchising story.
Right. So WTF, yeah. Which kind of could be where's the fun? Because it's been a pretty tough couple of years, and everybody I talk to tells me that it's pretty tough out there. It's a cost of living crisis, all that kind of stuff. So I see where you're coming from.
I have heard the rumours.
Although you wouldn't know it looking at you guys.
Oh no. We just had to drive up from Melbourne today to come to Sydney. We hitchhiked actually. It was great.
Excellent.
So no, we're going to go back. Just back, but before the word franchise, before you even knew what franchising meant, like what is franchising? Let's go. Where did you grow up, and tell us a little bit about your background.
Okay, straight. And this could take a while.
We're comfortable.
Been doing this for a while. I was born in Albo's electorate. I was born in Marrickville in Sydney. A Sydney boy all my life, but I've had the great opportunity to kind of travel and work in lots of different places around the world, and still live in Sydney today. So had I guess a quintessential Australian upbringing. Very conservative household. Dad was a banker. Mum kind of stayed at home most of the time that we were kids and looked after us, and went to the local kind of Catholic school. Played all the different sports that you do, and I'm still a long-suffering West Tigers fan. For those that follow the NRL, and for you guys from Melbourne, a dedicated Sydney Swans fan when we're winning, like most of our supporter base.
So Catholic. So you've 7 or 8 brothers? Sisters?
Yeah, one of 14. Well, it felt like that. One of 4 boys. Yeah. I've got 4 boys, not that I'd say that we're kind of observant, kind of religious folk these days by any stretch of
Fish and chips on
the
Friday,
imagination. One of 4
What
boys.
number are you?
I was the eldest.
Yeah.
And I said quite conservative family. Dad was an accountant, worked in banking all his life. So
I thought, was he like a bank manager as well? Because they travelled usually, didn't they? In that era,
he was, but didn't do a lot of travel. I did a lot of travel, but didn't get kind of stationed in different places. So being an accountant, I guess he was always in that finance side of the bank.
Right. So at a head office level? Or?
At a head office level, yeah.
Right, okay. And you said before your mum's from Wagga. Do you know, just tell me that.
Well, she was one of 8. So you'll see how I get to the 14 quite quickly.
Not much to do in Wagga, mate.
So she was, she grew up in Wagga, one of 8 kids, and when you've got 8 kids, there's a huge span, and I guess you learn to fend for yourself pretty quickly. She was the youngest. Came to Sydney when she was very young, and she and Dad kind of met in the Colgate Palmolive factory over at Balmain.
Is that right?
Which is kind of significant for me on 2 counts. When I was when I went to uni, I had the opportunity to go and spend a year in the country. So I went to Charles Sturt Uni for that year down in Wagga, and had an absolute blast of a time living on campus and doing all that fun stuff.
To the Black Swan.
Not a lot of learning. Went to the Duck, or its formal name, the Black Swan, and did the 57s and a few of those ceremonies that people from the area would be familiar with.
Yes, there's a few of those. What was? Did you ever go on the Gummy race down the river with the blow up? You did that?
Yep.
That's very cool.
Yep. 5 o'clock wave. All of those.
Well, it got later. It was 3 o'clock when I was living there. It's just progression. What was your mum's maiden name, if you don't mind?
Robinson.
Robinson. Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. Because there's only 6 people in Wagga, so
we could well be related. Yeah,
one of your sisters. You probably
do a little ancestry test. No, all boy. It's all boys. So only one.
It's the cousins. It's going to be the cousins, isn't it? Because your mum's gone. So are their cousins still there?
No, actually, I don't think we've got. I don't think we've really got much in the way of family in Wagga anymore. So
Okay. So where'd you get your work ethic from? I'm always interested in this because
look, I think Mum and Dad kind of.
Someone's phone's vibrating.
Dad worked 2 jobs when we were growing up,
It's not mine.
and
So I was hearing someone's phone.
I think that was mine. Yeah, sorry, I'll put
This
it
is
on.
coming through on the mic.
Gee,
I'll pop
Richard.
that on the
I'm going
floor.
to turn mine off. Crack on. Yeah, keep going.
So work ethic, I think, was something that was really instilled into us at a young age. I distinctly remember kind of Dad working 2 jobs and having getting up early, going to his study, and then coming home after work and working on weekends. So it was always kind of drilled into us.
Yeah.
I think it was a little different too. I mean, and just the things that you're expected to do around the house. I'm getting flashbacks to my first job, which was at a Westfield car park as a car park attendant with a buddy of mine, and it just shows how much things have changed. There was very little in the way of workplace health and safety, any of the payroll laws, anything like that.
Nice exhaust fumes.
So we didn't have a driver's license either. So we kind of took it upon ourselves, and we took a slightly more
So you're driving,
entrepreneurial
moving
approach.
cars around.
Well, we had to direct the traffic and in the Christmas holidays, and we'd have often kind of elderly people coming in, and we'd say, well, we can park it for you.
How long are you going to
Isn't
be?
there a movie with that happening?
Yeah,
Driving around and
So probably not the done thing these days, but I always thought there was potential for more of a valet service there.
Did you and what else did you do as a kid? Like, did you play sport? You said you
You play in
fan,
those days. I mean, in those days, you got told what to play, so you kind of played everything, and I kind of really enjoyed that. I wouldn't say that I was ever a first class sportsman by any stretch of the imagination, but really got out and had a go at everything. And then on weekends, we were very fortunate in those days. We had a kind of small house down south at the beach, and we got involved in the surf club down there. And
Where was that?
Spent a
Like
lot of
South
our
Coast?
South Coast down at Shell Harbour, or a place called Barrack Point, which very few people knew about at the time, and those areas have obviously become a lot more developed now. But they're probably some of my fondest memories as a kid, kind of on weekends building rafts.
How many?
all that
How
stuff.
between the 4 boys? What's the age gap from top to bottom?
Yeah, so I'm the oldest, and I'm 11 years older than the youngest. So same parents, just 2. Yeah, so two lots of 2, if you like, and a gap in between.
Yeah, very good. So from there, from school, local school, Catholic school.
Became an accountant.
From school, I went to I went to uni. I went through that what was a very traditional path at the time of a traineeship. Ended up in audit, and what I really liked about audit was it was quite a collegiate feel, because you had a bunch of people that were studying or had completed their degree, and were all working together. And one day you could be working at a merchant bank, the next day you'd be at a shipping company or an RSL, branch.
So did you
really
go
eclectic.
straight into the job without the degree?
So I
and
went
did
and
the
studied part-time.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
I think
cool.
to that point you made about work ethic, that was one of the things that was really drilled into us. And my parents didn't have the luxury of kind of going to uni and having all of that stuff paid for. So the full-time work, part-time study thing is difficult, but I think it's something that, something that really does instill those principles around time management, hard work, and just the on-the-job experience that you get as well. Which I really enjoyed that. But I quickly discovered I didn't want to be an accountant. And I don't think I was very good at it either, because I was far more interested about understanding how businesses worked.
But audit's interesting though, that you do, like you say, you get a bit of a taste of different businesses.
Yeah.
So you are getting in there and going to their premises back in the day. You're not.
So I found it fascinating to sit down with, and Brambles was one of our clients at the time, and that was a business made up of 100 odd companies, and then I went on to kind of work in one of their divisions for a while as well, and I kind of found it far more interesting sitting there talking to a divisional manager, or a general manager, or someone about how the business worked and what the challenges were. Not particularly good when you're an audit junior and billable hours are what really pays the bills, which is probably why I didn't stay. But I then kind of thought, I don't really want to be in that. And the firm I was working for became part of Deloitte, which is a fantastic large accounting firm, and you have some great training and learn some great principles, but very quickly it was something I didn't want to do for the rest of my life.
So how long did you do that for?
So I did that for a couple of years.
Right.
And I really then wanted to get into marketing. So I picked up some more marketing subjects at uni, but it was a challenge, because once you're in that kind of finance path, it's very hard to break out, and nobody clearly sees you as a sales and marketing person by any stretch.
Been labelled.
So I thought I've got to find the organisation with kind of that's right up there and known for its sales and marketing. And I literally stumbled across an ad at McDonald's and I applied for it. And they interviewed me and said, well, no way, you've obviously got no marketing experience, very little value to add, but we do have a role in an area called reporting and analysis, which was about as fascinating as it sounds when I describe it that way. And
I think your title was assistant product manager.
Well, I eventually got that. I got that esteemed title.
Oh.
I had to kind of get in. I had to get in there. Well, I had to get in. I had to figure out a way to get in. So I got in the bowels of the finance department.
Oh.
And I distinctly remember coming in at 7 a.m. and the dot matrix printer printing off all the yield reports from all the stores.
Yeah.
But again, looking back, what it did teach you is a well-run, well-organised, data-driven franchise system and how it works.
Yeah.
I then got a wonderful opportunity to work in the marketing team and be part of a lot of those fun promotional burgers and shooting commercials and doing all the great things that you get to do when you're with a big brand that has a big budget.
And in the 90s, so like Macca's obviously has been strong all the way through, but there were times where it did slow down, like it had massive growth and stuff. So this is massive growth time.
Yeah, this is massive growth time.
Yeah.
In those days, your voicemail was kind of quite new, so you had one of those, high-tech phones at the time with voicemail. You'd go out to lunch and you'd come back and there'd be a voicemail from the property department about the number of stores that had opened that morning, and it wouldn't be unusual, and you'd have to key them into your system and so forth, but it wouldn't be unusual that you'd come back from lunch and 2 new stores had opened. So enormous growth in that QSR category. And with that creates enormous opportunities and big brands spending on television. You're out there. I guess a smaller competitive set as well, and franchisees at that stage in the business that were really growing quite rapidly and building their own kind of businesses and getting to understand how they worked as well.
So what was that? Early 20s?
So no, that was in the 90s. I was only in my 20s.
but
the turn of the century.
Yeah, but I guess the thing is you're at an iconic franchising brand early in your career. It's like lots of things, like appreciating that the systems and processes that people from McDonald's have now taken into multiple businesses.
I think systems and processes, absolutely, but also a very strong understanding of the expectations that franchisees have. So franchise partners
that was where I was going to go.
Demanding expectations in those businesses.
And did you get access to, is your role, in any of the different roles that you had, were you getting to speak to franchisees?
Yeah, I've got lots and lots of battle scars from over the years. But one thing that I vividly remember from that time, and we'd be allocated projects at the start of the year. So if you got triple cheeseburger, you're like, oh, that's fantastic, because that's you walk in Monday morning, 260 units per 1,000 transactions will be a triple cheeseburger. All the 15-year-old boys see the ad, they go to the store, they buy it.
Yeah,
you tick. However, if you were doing something new that didn't quite have the same marginal yield, it was a really good learning experience having to take that from scratch and work with all the different departments, whether it was procurement, store building, finance, IT, to develop the systems and the playbook, and then put it in front of franchisees to say, well, okay, here's what we want to do. And as you guys know all too well, if franchise partners don't buy in, no matter how good that promotion is, it's not going to be successful at a store level. So I learnt that very carefully. And also, when you are doing things at scale in those big brands and you want to launch a promotional product, and whether it's a Happy Meal toy or an add-on or a licensed product, and you're ordering things in the hundreds and hundreds of thousands or the millions, you can't afford to make a mistake. So the importance of really doing your homework and being able to build a business case and articulate that in a way that it makes sense to somebody who's at the coalface selling to a customer every day.
What was the culture, the early 90s, what was the culture with franchisees then? Was it do as you're told, or was it very collaborative, or was it just make the money?
Look, I think it was all of the above, and it was very heavily weighted to high growth. But it was a system that people wanted to be part of. But I think as I look back at my broader franchising experience across a number of brands, I think overwhelmingly the culture was and probably became more of do of what we say, and this compliance-based culture. So to do anything other than follow the system is to fail. I think is what I certainly saw a lot of. And in fact, as a young person, employee, executive coming through the ranks, that's very much what you were taught. And I think it's something that some franchise systems struggle with today because the world's changing so much. And we're saying embrace change, but at the same time, a lot of people in franchising have come through their careers being told, don't change, stick to the system.
Yeah. And it is interesting because some of the businesses that we've looked at with investments and, and partners as well, they are not moving. Their model was set up 20, 30 years ago, and some of them have still got 1-2% marketing. And I think we've gone a long way past that. Look at the States particularly; they're always 3, 4, 5% marketing. It's just a different world.
Well, what I observed, and particularly in the McDonald's days, and working for guys like Guy Russo and Charlie Bell at the time, and being a very junior person, they were terrific to learn from. But the thing that struck me about the way they ran the business was that they were very, very in touch with their roots, which was at store level.
Yeah.
So they'd listen to kind of what came out of the support office. They'd listen to what came out of our agencies and our advisors, but they had this great instinctive gut feel and great relationships at a franchise level.
Had those guys been franchisees before?
Well, they worked in Guy and Charlie, who's sadly no longer with us, was started when they were kind of 14, 15-year-old.
Yeah.
So it was in there. It was in there. It was in their DNA. So I think they had really good understanding and great decision making that came from that experience.
So how long were you there for at Macca's?
I was there for a couple of years,
right?
And then went to Greater Union in the cinema business, a business that wasn't franchised, but a business that was under pressure at the time, because people were talking about how going to the movies would be eroded by videos, but a fun industry. I mean, because a new movie would open up, there'd be a premiere, there'd be a reasonable budget. I was national advertising manager, so it's a fun job.
So you're fully out of the numbers now.
So I feel like
I'd part of the business.
I feel like I'd made the transition. I'd been successful.
He's not the bean counter anymore. He's hanging out with the cool kids.
But then you're hanging out with the cool kids. But the other cool kids call you the bean counter. so you can still be picked on. Anywhere in life. Message to everybody.
Role. Yeah. So you would have been 25-ish, 26.
Yeah. I was in my 20s.
Big job.
Yeah. So great mentor at the time. Great team. Great business. Owned by the Amalgamated Holdings Group, had Ridges Hotels as well. Very much a family culture in that business, but an industry going through enormous change. And the reason I mention it today is that I think is what attracted me to that business, is that it was the first kind of almost turnaround experience in the sense that here's an industry that's always done very well. I grew up, as I said, traditional Australian household. I still remember going to see Star Wars at the movies.
Yeah.
And that was the kind of thing that you did in the holidays. The business model was very predictable because there was no alternative.
Yeah.
And at the time, we thought it would be wiped out or we thought there was a prospect, and people thought that it could be wiped out by video. And then you had DVDs come along, and nobody had even thought of streaming, obviously. So it was a really interesting time, and again a growth time. I was involved in the promoting the biggest cinema in the Southern Hemisphere at the time, equal biggest in the world, 30 screens in Adelaide of all places. So it was a really interesting time when the theatre business was working with the big shopping centre
that Marion
businesses at Marion in South Australia, and saying, well, we need to develop this concept of an entertainment and leisure precinct. And we had digital screens, digital sound, and big screens, and gold class cinemas, and all of those really fun things to work on. But it also taught you to be innovative and that you need to constantly change. So that was a fun experience, and I went from there into my next franchise business, which was in the car rental business, which was completely completely opposite.
So now he's GM of sales and marketing. So he's moving out of marketing and doing a bit of sales. Is that right?
I had to kind of continue the transition away
from the bean canning at Thrifty. So
at Thrifty,
how big was Thrifty?
Well, Thrifty was I guess it was considered at that time a second tier business compared to Avis and Hertz. Budget would have been the best known kind of franchise business from Bob Anset's days there and high profile highs and lows, but Thrifty was 80% owned by Mitsubishi at the time. And it was a time when car manufacturers kind of thought it was a good idea to own a car rental company one day, and then they thought it was a bad idea the next. The shock for me in going to that kind of business was, one, it was a franchise, different type of franchise business. And secondly, it was you could go and rent a lawnmower and you were paying more than you were to rent a car for a day. So incredibly commoditized, low margin business. Yeah. So again, you had to adjust your style. But again, I found I've probably learnt more from those businesses. And I got to work as part of a team that I would genuinely say was a real turnaround. And it was, what do we need to do to turn this business around? And a lot of grit went into that, and a lot of work with franchise partners to really understand how it could change. A good
business though, like what was the franchise model? Was it like you just clip the ticket on the top line revenue, or was
there's a royalty component to it? But what we quickly found was that franchisees in the car and truck rental business, great in trucks. So one of the things we did was got out of trucks altogether and said franchisees are better to run trucks because it requires a level of knowledge and hands-on experience. However, conversely, when you go to airports and you're dealing with big international travel wholesalers and now online booking engines and complicated, expensive leases at privately owned airports, that's something beyond a mum and dad investor, and that's something that's better corporately done. So that's really the way that we changed the business. And in regional areas, was the key learning there was a franchise partner was the best way to go any day of the week. But at a big metro airport, they really needed to be corporatized. So it became a hybrid mix.
So, and what sort of numbers of franchisees compared to corporate locations?
So two-thirds franchise still. Yeah, and then what we did was went out. We only had about 30, 35, but they were more like master franchise agreements. Yeah. So WA, for example, and it still is my understanding, a master franchise agreement. Right. But we quickly learnt that to build a brand and to turn around a brand and brand perception, you needed to get first-rate customers on board, and we needed to get volume. And so we went out and we secured some corporate customers, and that really kind of taught me a lot about corporate sales and working with some great people there to position ourselves as a value-based brand, and to really demonstrate that we could do everything that the big guys could do. We could just do it on at the right price.
Can I ask a stupid question, because I'm full of them? Mitsubishi, they still make cars, or do they just do trucks? And they're also in air conditioning, aren't they?
They are. So you've got Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, which is a different business from the car manufacturing business. Right. And then in Australia at the time, and one of the reasons that I think that they were in the car rental business at the time is because they had manufacturing in South Australia. Right. Okay. So once you the other thing that was clearly going to happen once subsidies left car manufacturing in Australia was that cars wouldn't be made here anymore. Yeah. So there was a lot of pressure on the business. Mitsubishi was struggling at the time, I think, to get cars with broad enough appeal, and you had a whole lot of new entrants coming in, and great reliable cars. This was well before EVs were even thought of.
But they're massive, aren't they? It's a massive business.
They're big. Yeah, all of the car manufacturers are big businesses, and so Australia was not a huge market for them at all. And the other thing that I kind of saw at the time was this transition of going from the way businesses traditionally work. Somebody calls a call center and says they need to rent a car or they have a corporate agreement, to the very, very start of online. So at the time, it was online was about 4%, I think, 4 or 5% of bookings were done online. Nowadays, it'd be 96%. It would be done online at least, I'd imagine. So we really kind of tapped into that and started developing those booking channels.
So what next?
That got me. That kind of. I then left. I stayed in a travel related industry and went to a company owned by that was spun off by American Airlines, Sabre Pacific. Sabre was in the travel booking space. I was interested in learning more about technology. They were a big American company. We're a relatively small arm here. But I did a lot of work in selling our technology into travel agents and travel groups, and a lot of those were franchised. So you could do a deal at a corporate level with a franchisor, but you really needed the franchisee to buy into your system. And it was a unique business model in the sense that we were charging the airline to book a segment, a flight or a segment, and we were paying an incentive to the travel agent to use our system. So again, you needed to be good at selling your system. So I really thoroughly enjoyed that role and got to go to lots of fun places and big conferences and events that travel industry at the time was known for.
You had to fly in front of the plane.
So there were occasions when so I did see Jay Westbury's podcast.
Yeah.
And I would say that Jay's probably spent a lot more time at the front of the plane by the sound of it. So. But I think anyone who's worked in the travel industry has there is a kind of part of that never leaves you, and it's a fun industry to be part of. But an industry that was going through really dramatic change. And at the time, Sabre recognised that, and they bought Travelocity, and that's what really interested me. I thought, these businesses are changing, and there's something in this whole online thing.
I'm just going to check the time because how long have we got? Because I really want to drill into your thoughts on the franchise industry now. You've got let's rip through the next ones from Sabre. Where were you from?
Well, we've got three. So Fastway Careers, Stat Printing and Careers Plays are all CEO roles that you've got.
Yeah, so let me quickly...
Was that, and just before you do answer that, you seem like a very considered person. So was your end vision to be running businesses, and you thought, I've got to put myself in different businesses, different roles, so I become very rounded, and therefore I can be, and that's, or you just didn't know what the fuck you wanted to do?
Look, I think we all start off not knowing what we want to do or having some grandiose vision of what we'd like to do. But I think partway through that journey, I did think, you know what, I'd like to have a go at running one of these businesses. And I remember, going from the turning point for me was I was head of sales and marketing at Thrifty, and my boss, the MD at the time, mentor of mine, said, look, called me into his office and said, we've got a new role for you, and I'd like you to take on the head of franchising role. And I went home and thought, what have I done wrong? I thought I was doing a good job. and the way that he explained it to me, and I didn't know for the first couple of years whether it was true or not, was, listen, if you ever want to sit in this seat on this side of the table, you need to get more well-rounded experience.
Yeah, right.
And it was, in hindsight, the best advice, some of the best advice I'd ever been given. And he did, and he would put the pressure on you, and you did learn. And when I went from, I guess, roles that were either in sales, marketing, finance, those things I'd done before, to all of a sudden running the company and running aspects of a company, you realise that your day is not kind of structured the same way. Because all of a sudden you're dealing with, you might say, I'm really busy in the sales and marketing area. No disrespect to people that work in those because they're very busy, but you're busy working on maybe 10 things. All of a sudden you jump across into roles in franchising and roles running businesses, and you're dealing with at least 100 things, and more than 100 different personalities at the same time. So that was really the turning point for me. And I went, and going to Fastway, was a founder-led business. And it was my, first opportunity to run a P&L genuinely, and that was a key motivation for me going there. And then I ended up kind of running the business, and at a time, and I guess the important thing for me about that stage in the journey was that it allowed me to do two things. It allowed me to run a P&L as part of a bigger business in an industry that was going through enormous change. And at the same time, take what I'd always thought was going to happen, which was this big change in e-commerce, and put the two together. And what I mean by that is I joined that business in 2008 at the GFC and thought, what have I done? I left a good job to come here.
Yeah, perfect timing.
Timing.
Yeah.
But what it did, and we were a smaller player in the parcel business, and we're a B2B box moving business. What it did do was give us an opportunity to get on the radar of bigger businesses. because bigger businesses thought, wow, we've got to go and search for lower cost providers, which we were. And they weren't necessarily sending full pallet loads and full container loads anymore. So they needed some alternatives. So we got ourselves on the radar very quickly. It also, there was a little bit of shock and awe for me because it was a franchise system where you would see your franchisee 3 times a day. They'd come in a van in the morning. They'd have to load up. At that time, we were doing across town the same day. They'd come back at lunchtime and they'd go back out. So if you were disagreeing about something, there was quite a bit of interaction, a lot of opportunity. Unlike other franchise systems I'd been exposed to, where franchise partner would be in their store and the support office person would be elsewhere. So that was quite confronting in some ways. And it was all the other thing I learned, and I've kind of have enormous respect for, is the number of people that I met through that system that had come to Australia with very little, or in some cases nothing, other than great work ethic, and were prepared to roll up their sleeves and do what it took, and they'd be there at 5 a.m, and they'd be there as long as it took. And they understood that to be successful as a franchisee in that kind of business, you had to build your own customer base.
Yep.
You couldn't just say, well, where's my... They were making money out of generating their own pickup customers, not deliveries that they were getting as a consequence of being part of a brand.
Yeah, okay.
So it really, that's the one thing that really kind of stuck with me. And the other thing was that in about 2011, a colleague and I thought, wow, I really think there is something to this whole e-commerce online retail thing. But we didn't know anything about it. So we thought, we better go and learn. So we enrolled in as many courses, went to as many conferences. And I remember the first one that we kind of went to, everybody seemed to know everyone, a whole bunch of kind of groovy tech people, all the cool kids wore their black T-shirts. And we went back to the bar afterwards and thought, geez, we don't know anything. We've got so much to learn. Then we quickly realised that all we had to do was learn and stay one step ahead of everybody else. So that's kind of what we did. We promoted ourselves as the online retail experts. And we went about trying to sell that message in to our franchise partners, who are very practical people and see through bullshit very quickly. And so the best way to convince them was to go and get some brands on board.
Well, let's stop. Well, I reckon there's a lot in, we've got the roles, but your bigger question, let's put the FCA hat on now, because you've been in roles within volunteer roles within the FCA on state chapter committees and, into the national board and, now the chairman, and it through a tough time, but
which is still a voluntary role.
It's still a voluntary. No, I know. So your part-time gig, we're going to get to the fact that you are unemployed at the moment, and we're, No, but the franchise industry's had a lot of turmoil. Like if you're talking about all the things you've been involved in, there's is the franchising model, one of the questions that John we asked of John, is franchising dead? Like is it as a business model broader? Do we need to do something?
I think any industry that has kind of 4 government inquiries in a dozen years has got to look and say, well, yeah, there's something there, and there are a small number of high profile cases where people have done the wrong thing. To deny that would be silly. There's an enormous number of people that make a living and have made a very good living out of franchising, and wouldn't have those businesses and that equity themselves if they weren't part of a franchise system, frankly. So I think undoubtedly the good outweighs the bad. But the reality is that just as the rest of the economy's changed, that's had a bearing on franchising and the way that franchisors need to structure their businesses. And what you're seeing with technology and AI is going to lead to another change in that as well. What I would say is that some of the industries that have been franchised in the past may not be suitable to be franchised in the future. So if you look at heavily regulated industries like banking and finance, telecommunications, are they likely to be as franchised in the future as they have been in the past? In my opinion, no, that's unlikely.
In a traditional model.
Yeah, motor dealerships.
Motor dealerships, you've seen enormous change. You've got, 13 new EV brands, I think, coming into Australia in the next 2 or 3 years. So we're going to see enormous changes there. But I also think from a regulatory point of view, applying the same regulations to most other franchise systems that you apply to car dealerships and automotive brands doesn't make any sense either. So I think we need to be a little bit smarter as a country about that.
Particularly like when you look at it, like you look at what's happening in the US, and there's lots of, listed franchisee entities are selling car dealerships. So whereas franchising is what you were saying before, people, mum and dads buying a business, having a crack at a local level. It's a bit different from a listed company that's a franchisee across
absolutely
100 locations.
Absolutely
so
right.
You're dealing the protections like in that industry, like the franchisees are massive sometimes, and yes,
they are. They're
global
big
companies.
listed businesses.
Yeah.
So we're an eclectic group of businesses when you consider that most franchisors in Australia are small businesses. Fit the small business definition. Having said that, I think franchisees, franchise partners, have an expectation that the franchisor will be well capitalised, will have enough resources to support them adequately, and won't get ahead of themselves in terms of growth. And I think we've made enormous progress in that respect. I think if you look,
do you think we have really?
I do think so. Yeah,
because I think there's still a massive part of the market. You know, John's where to do a bit of research is for our investment business where 65 % of the market have got less than 25 or 20 franchisees.
yeah.
So there's this massive part of the sector that aren't capitalised.
Well, I think
enough.
what you will see as part of that though is consolidation, like we've seen in the US.
Yeah.
And there's enormous competition for competent, great people out there at the moment as well. So we've seen the last couple of years we've had chronically low unemployment. So it's been hard for a lot of brands to attract the right people. So there's intense competition.
Right people at both levels, at franchisee and head office.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
But I think there's another factor here as well, and it's the Uberization, if you like, of the industry. So and this particularly pertinent in mobile services is that I can go and drive for Uber or one of those other platforms, and I can turn up when I want to. I don't have to invest much. I can hand back the keys, or I can just actually don't even have to do that. I just switch off the app when I don't want to continue, and I don't need to invest the same level that I have traditionally in a franchise model. So I think it's really important for franchising to continue to thrive, and I think it can in Australia, that we look at and take some lessons from those models and say, well, that's the competitive set now. We're not just competing with other franchise systems, we're competing with these online platforms. So I think we need to be a little bit smarter about that.
Yeah, so you're coming through, you're 20-something, you know, instead
absolutely.
of paying 50,000 or 20,000 or something to buy a franchise, you can change your mind pretty quickly and go, yep, I'm going to deliver pizzas or I'm for a company or I'm going to, but I don't need to be a franchisee to do that.
Yeah.
And are they making...
Well, I think the other point there, Bruce, is that franchising's traditionally required you to do one thing, to be a franchisee. Now, a lot of people coming out of school these days are saying, well, I might not only have 3 or 4 careers, in all likelihood they will, but I might do some of those things at the same time. So I might be a part-time gym instructor while I consider studying more and have my side hustle and sell some of the stuff I promote online through my videos or through my high-rating podcast that's competing with you. And so I think that's the way business is going to be done in the future.
It's interesting because one of the look, I love franchising. I think it's great for the right people. But one of the, what do we call those things when we go to the other states, or the forums or
Performance lab, whatever,
which we shouldn't be calling it that. But and we go around the room. We go, okay, how often are your franchisees visited? And they go from anywhere from once a month to once a year. And you know, I know with RFG they're under very different management now, but after we sold, that all just dried up. All the store
so this
visits.
is Michelle's.
Yeah.
So Michelle's. So you've got 360 stores. How often were you? Sorry to interrupt, but just
Every
so people,
month.
you were visiting face to face every month, every franchisee, and so RFG changed that when it was under their
P&Ls, everything. They went when we had 1 to every 20, 25 maybe. They went 1 to 40. You know, when we did those ratios up in Queensland, I think it was. But it was just mind blowing how the variation. I'm like, fuck, how do people get it that wrong?
How can it be that different? Yeah. No, and I was brought up, I guess, the same way, which is you've got to be there every month, and you've got to demonstrate what value the support you're providing is adding.
They're the business partner.
And you've got to be present to be their business partner. I think being present, though, can be delivered a little differently going forward.
Definitely.
So things like P&Ls can be automated across standard chart of accounts and can be offshored, and all that kind of stuff can be done. A lot of the traditional compliance stuff can be done. What I don't think you can replace is the quality conversations that are very hard to have using AI.
But is it so the face-to-face element I'm interested in as well, because obviously, we went through everything was online. We got locked in our houses, particularly us in Melbourne, for 2 years essentially. So everybody's very used to doing Teams and Zoom and stuff like that. But I think there's still a lot of we think the good systems that when they talk about it, they might have a quarterly visit face to face and do two.
I think online's great and has a place, but I think as a franchisor, you've got to just in your mind's eye, you've got to pull the camera back and see what's going on, and have a look at the wider view of the business.
It's both people's benefit.
I think you need to have a hybrid. You need to have a hybrid mix. And the other thing I think you need to do is get franchisees together.
Well, that's really interesting.
Absolutely.
No, it's real, because you talk about that a bit with the good systems and how they learn from each other.
So if I'm at a franchise conference, franchise systems conference, I could close my eyes and be blindfolded all day, and not have people introduced, and I know who's speaking. I can tell you when a fellow franchisee is speaking, and I can tell you when a corporate person's speaking. And the difference is you could hear a pin drop when another franchisee is speaking, and the round of applause is typically a little bit louder. And that's because we learn from people that we've got that affiliation with and that understand our business, and we learn from our peers. So I don't think that's changed just because we've got all this tech.
So we got a dodgy bloke in part of the investment group, a guy called Michael Irma. He's been around for a little while. He's quite old now. Hope he's watching this.
Glad you qualified that.
But he's fantastic operations, and he's introduced this thing called Lunch and Learn with one of the businesses we've invested in. So it's every 2 weeks. Everyone gets on the call, chats about what's happening, what's working. Just hear from your peers, not hearing from us.
I've been amazed at and I don't know the stat off the top of my head, but literally hundreds of franchisor staff and franchisees have turned up to the FCA's Lunch and Learn sessions.
And they've
been incredibly popular. I know you did one recently, Bruce, that didn't rate quite as well, but
I think it was the biggest ever.
was really popular. So
the 3 people that were there loved it.
But we had Erms was on the one we did, and it was an operational one. And so we had, Erms's background is, bakers and boost juice. So,
but I think as well and we look at what the universities are doing with micro credentials, delivering information in bite-sized chunks so people can stay up to date. I think is the other really interesting thing. I mean, if you're genuine about being a lifelong learner, then you need to be able to kind of stay up to date. But as life gets busier and you're busy and you've got family life, that's not easy. So I think just being able to consume those things in bite-sized chunks.
But also, I'm interested, and I know you mentioned that there are franchisees on the FCA stuff, and I know that been on the committee for 15 years as well. We've really struggled to get franchisee engagement at that level. And I think because you're trying to run the same things for franchisors as franchisees, it's like, take you out of your business, come in here.
I think they're different audiences.
Yeah, that's right.
And what we've got to say is, well, what is the best way to deploy? Are we deploying information? Are we trying to educate, or are we trying to get feedback? And they're different things, and we've got to get out there. I don't think the FCA is any different from a franchisor in the sense that if we want to get meaningful feedback and really understand our constituents, the best place to do it is out there. And I think Jay and the team are doing an awesome job of that at the moment, is getting out and talking to franchisors and franchisees face to face in their own environment.
But we'll go back to this emerging, being capitalised franchisors. So there's so many emerging franchisors, and things have been tough. We think we started with cost of living. It's been a difficult time. So you're a franchisor, you've got 15 locations. You don't have that big a budget to fly people around the country. You want your franchisees together, but they're probably coming out of a time when the trust is not always there, and that's partly because of the franchisor hasn't had the capital to do what they said they were going to do. Like re-engaging those networks, doing things like getting the franchisees together can be a bit scary for the franchisors.
Well, it's tough because at that stage you're very much building a business around a great concept not a proven concept. And I think it's making that leap can be really tough for people. And I think a lot of people will join an organisation like the FCA after they've been in business for 5 years, 6 years, 10 years. Really the most important time to join an industry association to me is right at the start, because you've got access to all of these people that are generally, in my experience in franchising, quite willing to help if you ask the question.
Yep.
Because that's one way people can reach out. And the other thing I think there is that you can perform very quickly a benchmarking exercise and understand, well, what are other brands doing? I think franchisees obviously need to do their due diligence when they're going in. So some of those brands benefit from relatively sophisticated investors coming in, who can actually add something as a franchisee, can add something to the system very quickly as well.
What I think the biggest part of it, I'll get a bit spiritual about this stuff, but out of all the businesses I've looked at over the years that are at that early stage, the most important thing they need is like emotional support. Yeah. It sounds really stupid.
At the founder level.
At the founder level, because they've been going for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, whatever, and they've been cracking away. There's been some mistakes and they're stuck and they're struggling for money and blah, blah, blah. And they're mentally fucked.
It can be exhausting. Yeah. You can be absolutely exhausted, and then you've got to get up and inspire other people. Yeah. It's not going to happen.
Which is why, again, we're to FCA, but the FCA can provide support for those people if people take up the opportunity to do that. And you run a CEO group, for example.
Absolutely. And I think being in those trusted environments is incredibly important when you're either a founder or when you're a CEO. And that old expression that it can be lonely at the top is absolutely right. Very. But I think to your point about emerging brands, I think it's absolutely critical that you pick the time and stage that you surround yourself with the right people, whether that's it doesn't always need to be a formal board, but the concept of an advisory board, I think, is incredibly important. But it's also knowing that somebody that might be a great mentor and support for you at the start of your journey, you may outgrow very quickly, and it's that having that respectful conversation with people to say, you know what, this is what I really need, being honest enough about it and going out and seeking that help, but then knowing that, that team around you isn't necessarily going to carry you to 50 units or 100 units. That will be a different level of sophistication and experience.
You can see the stages as they go through, absolutely. Because, it is interesting because when we did the research on, where they're registered, they've got their disclosure documents. What's that called? Where they have to register?
Franchise disclosure register, yep.
There you go. There was a lot of bullshit information in there about the size. And so the takeaway was, as Bruce said, it was 63 or 65% were 20 or under. Don't know how reliable that is because it was based on the registry and they do it very quickly. But it was really clear that the scale issue is massive, and how do we help them to bust through that? You know what I mean? And I, particularly now doing what we're doing, and over the last years, these guys are struggling to pay their own bills, let alone go and pay for a FCA membership. It's not that expensive, but for a couple of grand, it's a lot of money.
It is, and I think
how do we get to them and get them?
And I think that's certainly something we're looking at the FCA is how do we make that as affordable as possible? Yeah. They're the kind of people you want to come along to NFC.
Absolutely,
they're the kind of people that. And we've got the inaugural FIAs, a quick plug for the Franchise Industry Awards that are coming up in a couple of weeks.
We'll probably go to air after.
Well, buy a ticket for next year.
But do you think that problem?
But I think all of those events is what I'm getting at is you need to be at those events because they're the things that keep you motivated. Yeah. But to your question, John, about how do you make all of that happen? It's an age-old thing, isn't it? How do you get experienced people to invest some time and energy these brands? And I think the concept of investment is an important one. To me, do you want to own 100% of a small franchise system that takes 10 years to get off the ground, or are you prepared to give up some equity to get some experience on board to challenge you? to help you and to help you grow. I think that's one really really sensible
But
path.
it sounds like
people
there's a
should
few
consider.
different tips for the emerging franchisors. Is being open to whether it be to learning
Yep.
all the time. When you talked about thirst for learning type things, it's like you need to get you're not going to learn from yourself.
No, so you need to
learn from
surround
others.
you need to
Is
surround
it a board?
yourself.
Is it an investor?
Exactly,
What is it?
and
Is it
that's
the FCA, other franchisors.
and I think
I think it's FCA.
Well, it could be one of it. Could be all of these things. You know, for that emerging.
and I think
market.
that's the point. And I think it some stage over your journey, it will be all of those things.
Yeah.
you
Can I
think-
roll up to larger? Because
Yeah.
we're going to. I just
Yeah.
want to talk. We sort of said we're going to come back to the bigger ones, but so you've worked in some bigger systems now that are owned by internationals or private equity. I think one of them is that. But just looking now at a big system, how do you still engage with your franchisees when you start to have bureaucracy involved?
Yeah, look, it's a great question. I mean, when I ran the Snap business, we had 120 odd franchise partners, many of whom had been in the system for 30 years. So they knew it incredibly well. The most recent system that I ran, Careers Please, we had 850 franchise territories. So, and then inevitably you end up with a mixture of franchise partners, contract drivers, because you're running a big network that can't stop. It needs somebody to pick up, somebody to deliver. So there's a lot of moving parts to it. So certainly, technology plays a really important part in those bigger systems. You've got to have the regular meetings. And the reality is that you're relying on your team members. It's impractical for the CEO of those systems to get 800 calls a week from people. So I think a solid, robust franchise advisory council is an absolute must in those systems.
So you've got to, because demonstrating that, whether you're listed, you're private equity owned, you're just big, big family group with so many franchisees, that you do care about the ultimate success of the franchisees and listening to them and understanding what they're going through.
Well, I think there's two components to it too. There's times where you've got to protect the brand. And there's a lot of people in the brand. So damage can be done easily. So I think that's one consideration. And the other is, if you're in an industry that's changing quickly, you've got to be a great listener and you've got to pick up on all of those practical ideas. But you also have a leadership role to play, which is to say, well, yes, we've heard that, but on balance, the world is going this way. Give you a practical example is, Amazon came into the Australian market not to test the waters, but to grow and to grow substantially. So anybody who thinks that isn't going to happen is swimming against the tide. There's
definitely.
no way that's not going to happen, and that's been borne out over the last couple of years. So, but that involves often taking franchise partners on the journey who will, and a lot of you've been in a lot of situations where you'll have people that have had a business for 20 or 30 years. They've got a pretty clear line of sight on their retirement, their exit. And online in the printing industry was a great example. When I was at Snap, a lot of people would say there's no money in online printing, and online printing is low margin. Somebody coming in and working with you is much higher margin. But my approach to those things has always been, you've also got to have one eye on who's going to buy your business off you. And I'd put it to you that if you don't have good technology and you don't have an e-commerce component in that type of business today, it's not going to be very appealing to somebody in their 20s and 30s.
Yep.
So,
Definitely.
Well, return on investment, it's really like whether, franchisors actually have an eye on whether the franchisees are going to get a return on investment with given all the changes that are happening. And
with the change,
and then their own business, obviously.
and
So
it
the
can
two
be a big
parts.
argument about where is the investment made. So, and when you venture into e-commerce, it challenges the traditional thinking around franchise territories and boundaries and who's getting what. So it goes back to this fundamental question of trust. And it's a constant theme when I listen to your podcasts, is that franchise systems that have done well have often had to go back and really build or do a sense check on that trust, and then go on the journey together, because investing in tech is a big investment for franchisors and franchisees realistically these days.
Definitely. Do you think the States franchise industry is obviously bigger, but the similar issues? Do you have any? Have you had any contact with?
Look,
your
I think
counterpart
when you listen to and you see the information published through IFA, for example, you'll see that there are similar challenges around labour law reforms, not to the same degree that we have here. I think everybody listening to this podcast would be aware that we are one of the most regulated economies in the world when it comes to franchising. So I think that is the challenge around that. I think is it becomes a deterrent for investors, and I think that's not a great thing for Australia. But no, I think there are similarities. One of the big trends, obviously, that we've seen in the US in recent years is private equity getting in and investing.
Massive.
And that can sometimes be seen as a dirty word, but I think if you look at it more broadly, it goes to the heart of that issue that you mentioned, Bruce, about, are franchisors adequately capitalised? And one of the ways that you get adequately capitalised is by finding the right investment partners. So that's the big, that's one of the big differences that I've seen in the US. Now you can scale more quickly sometimes when you've got a much bigger population like they do in the US. It's a very entrepreneurial society, but I think we're going to see a similar thing here. And I think what we've also seen is the rise of the mumbos, the multi-brand, multi-unit operators. So,
But we don't get that here, do we?
I think you're starting to see it, and I think you will see more of it.
Both of those things are the difference between the US. So the same thing happens in the US. That there's underfunded. There's lots of franchise systems.
Absolutely.
Like the total number of franchise systems hasn't increased substantially in the last 10 years. Like
Is that
it's
right?
4,000 or 4,500
Yep.
or whatever it is. It's not like it's gone from 4,000 to 8,000 because franchise systems fail. Franchisors fail. They get merged. They get because the ones that are well funded, which is more and more private equity. So it's the same in Australia. There's a big consolidation piece in Australia, whether it's private equity, because Australian franchise systems, private equity hasn't played a big role.
No, and I think there's this perception sometimes that they're higher risk investments, but realistically, private equity isn't looking for high risk investments. They're looking for a level of certainty. What they do want to make sure, obviously, is that things are well run and well governed. I think we're going to see more and more of that kind of creep into the Australian market.
But it's interesting that you say that because I don't know if I'm allowed to say it, but we can beat this out. But the bank that we were dealing with, where we did those performance things, they said to us that they did some analysis after COVID, and the franchise industry was definitely well above normal business with regards to people getting through support,
Absolutely.
all that sort of stuff. Now, you're talking about risk. That's not fucking risk, but that's exactly why these guys are investing in these bigger businesses and taking them from 80 million to 160 and
I think, John, though, one of the challenges the banks have had over the years, and as 1 minute banks appear to want to finance franchisors, the next minute they
do jump in and jump out.
They don't, and that's a fact over the years. Is that it's not a linear journey from having 5 to having 50 to 100. It goes through stages, and those stages that we talked about before require levels of investment. So as a result, the return can sometimes be a little bit bumpy, and I think that's why you've seen PE enter the market in the US, because they look at it and say, okay, well, let's look at this over a 3-year or a 5-year time frame. Right, we can see how we can grow from 100 to 300 or whatever the number may be over that time frame.
With the right resourcing.
We're nearly out of time, guys. So I think we will loop back right round and say, like, what sort of tips, you look back at your early self and you got into franchising at Macca's, and you've gone from in lots of different areas within franchise systems. So what sort of tips have you got for franchisors?
I think the big one for me, Bruce, is embrace the change. Don't fight the change. I mean, and it sounds, John, like you were kind of trained the way I was, which is follow the system, don't do anything else. Don't be afraid to listen to people challenging the system. Absolutely. Nothing wrong with that. Much better to be challenged by people inside than it is to be challenged by a regulator or somebody outside. Yeah. And I think the other one that is the hot topic at the moment is AI, which kind of reminds me of when we were learning about e-commerce in the Fastway days, is that there's nothing wrong with saying you don't know. as long as you go and find out,
Yeah.
and go and learn,
Yeah.
and go and find out. And there's lots of places to do that, and the FCA website is a really good starting place. for
It's
people.
like this World Wide Web thing that hasn't really taken off. has
That
it?
kind of took
Have you heard
off.
of that?
I can't tell you the number of meetings that I sat in where people said, "Do you really think this e-commerce thing's going to take off, or is it just a fad?"
Yep, it's going all right.
Hey,
Now-
last question.
Oh,
last
geez.
question. Do we have to go?
Yeah, we do.
Oh,
but
fuck it. Are you enjoying the role as chairman?
Yeah, look, I left my full time gig at Careers Please recently when we sold the business. So it's given me a little bit of time to focus on some family things, to spend a little bit of time with Jay and the team at the FCA. I'm enormously proud of what the team under Jay's leadership has accomplished over the last year. We're back in the black, which is great. But that's just one part of it. The other thing is getting back to what you talked about before, John, which is I think we're now in a good place where we can start to help some of those emerging franchise systems.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And to me, that's what I would really like to see. And I think there's an incredibly important role that we can play in the education space. So watch out for those two things. And I've had a sneak preview of some of the things that are coming up for NFC this year, and I think we're going to have one of the
that's
biggest and the best that we've got. And it's a really important time from a regulatory point of view. One thing I would say to people in our industry, not that franchising is an industry as a sector, is that when we are talking to government, I think it's really important that people that work in Canberra and represent us understand more about franchising. So I think there's a role that we can all play in that.
Yep.
But it is important that we all sing from one voice as well, and that we have one consistent message.
Great.
Good. Thank you.
Sorry.
No,
I
no.
won't say anything more.
No, we're going to go. Yep, we're going to go. We're done. Thank you very much.
Thanks
Great
for the
to talk to
opportunity,
you.
gents.
Yeah, we'd like to
Great
talk
to chat.
Good to see you.
And anyone watching, if you like the episode, make sure you like
Oh,
it and
here
please
we go.
share. Yeah, I know. Got to do a bit of promo. Jeez, got to pay the bills, mate. Okay, thank you very much.
To the 6